we'll be talking about market systems development in the world, which is increasingly being in crisis. We'll unpack that. But before I move on, David, you may share some of the exciting work that you're working on now.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rubaiyath, and good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I know people will be joining us as we go. Um, it's great to see some familiar names and some new names. So I see John Clifford, Lucio. Nice to see you both as well as Bill. So Rubaiyath and I, when this idea came about, we were obviously in the context of structuring a collaboration between myself and Innovision going forward. We were obviously talking about various things, the state of MSD, the state of development, etc. And we thought, well, why are we having a private conversation about this? Why don't we do two things? Why don't we, start to broaden that out? Invite a number of people in, put an open invitation out, see who else wants to join. Let's get a bit of a conversation going. Obviously, I'm sure Rubaiyath promised that he would go easy on me today with some nice simple questions to whet my appetite. And being a Friday afternoon, it doesn't want to appear like anything like actually work that I've got to think too hard about. For any of you that turned up to find the answer to all the world's crises, I'm not sure I have it, but possibly I have some further questions that might go in the pot along with everybody else's, and some reflections around that. And the idea would be that we would sort of test this case a little bit, and seek to continue to build on these sort of fireside chats by starting to shape some agenda moving forward, inviting other people to sit in the hot chair, as it were, and see this really as a start of a longer term conversation with like-minded individuals, thinking thoughts on MSD in as Rubaiyath said, in a dynamically different world, I guess, now to what it was when MSD's origins and when it first started. Context very different. Many of the challenges remain encouraging or depressingly very similar to me. Or maybe I'm just jaded, looking at the world in the same lens all the time, so I see the same things. I don't know. So that's the purpose really of today, is just to broaden it out and look at it from my own side. Just for some of you who don't know me, and even for those of you who do, I guess if I start from 2000, when I started collaborating with the Springfield Center. Prior to that, I was working as an economist and been in academia and then in consultancy, doing sort of more, I guess, sort of modeling the world, really, doing more sort of trade and investment policy, industrial policy stuff, bigger models and so on, World Banky, multilateral kind of things. I was getting a little bit frustrated. And so when I left South Africa as the chief economist for the Northern Cape government for 18 months, 2 years or so, and I guess made a decision that I didn't want to keep studying the world. I guess I wanted to actually participate in it, and if you like, move from sort of slightly more remote macroeconomic work into more microeconomic work, and having dipped out of development for a couple of years, I started collaborating with Alan and Rob at the Springfield Center. And in 2000 and 2003, left what I was doing in London and joined them, and mostly enjoyed 16, 17 years as a director with them at the Springfield Center. Left in 2019, and deliberately thought there's a good opportunity, I suppose, to step aside, step out. I didn't want to stay. I wanted, I guess, to decompress a little bit personally and re-energize myself professionally. So I thought, well, how best to do that? And I guess I was feeling a little bit as though MSD, for me, and maybe just the role I was in it, was a little bit of an echo chamber, seeking the same kind of people, the same context, the same kind of work. So I wanted to step a bit out of that. And I said, let's go and talk to some different people. Let's go and I guess put myself to the test a little bit and say, we keep saying MSD skills are quite generalizable. Well, let's see if they are. Let's see if others share a sort of an interest, and whether that we can bridge the sort of gap of language that we like to use in different development boxes, and whether some of the thoughts I have on development and some of the, such as they are, some of the skills and strengths I might have, might help others in other areas with some of the challenges they're facing. So I deliberately stepped away and and started doing some different things and hold your feet to the flames a little bit and see if they some degree. So that's what I've been doing for a few years. Keeping my hat into with certain things. I really enjoy working with Bill, for example, on the MAID review. I'm continuing doing some work on the FSDs and financial inclusion work, and so in agriculture and finance and so on. But more so, majority of my time these last 3 or 4 years has been, as I say, in new and different areas for me personally. Those two big areas, I think there's three areas, I guess, I've been spending more time engaging in. One is in health systems through a partnership with Edinburgh University and this heading of managing markets for health, which has been intriguing in many ways and invigorating. I guess that for those of us working in development that have a passion for development, there's nothing quite like a passion about working in maternal and child health and thinking if I can make a difference there, boy, would that make a real difference to many people. So working in that, I'm working a little bit in some of the climate change areas in different, again, slightly bigger macro stuff, working with the British government on their partnering for advanced climate transitions, a global program, looking at some of those bigger global climate challenges around electrifying urban mobility, looking at energy efficiency, particularly in buildings and so on, energy and power, and obviously greening financial systems and climate finance to look to reorient, if you like, the way financial flows go towards innovations that can also not just generate economic growth, but also climate transition. And on micro levels, looking at sort of solid waste management and recycling services, but all the private sector in those areas in the Middle East. And something which I've kind of started but haven't really got into yet. And it intrigues me in terms of the title, but I don't know quite what it means yet. But working with someone that many of you might know, Luca Crudelli, on thinking MSD applied to the blue economy, which is kind of that's why I'm kind of wearing a partly blue shirt, and having a bit of a picture I have behind me on the screen here, thinking blue economy stuff. So stepping out and seeing whether or not some of the principles of MSD, some of the things that I think are important to good development principles of practice, are they relevant in these sectors? Do they resonate in these sectors? Can we find a way of what the challenges these sectors face, and do we have anything to say and speak to in that respect? And can we help? So I've been asking, I guess, throwing myself in and asking those questions of myself in the last few years, and partly then tying up, just closing that circle very briefly, agreeing to sharing some of these early discussions with you, Rubaiyath, a year ago, and looking at some of the work you and your colleagues at Innovision were doing and some of the challenges you were facing. It seemed an opportune time to be thinking, well, maybe we should start, joining our heads together a little bit and strategizing and pooling and tackling some of these things a little bit more, both collaboratively and coherently. And that brings us neatly through to where we are today.
Fantastic, David.
So there we go.
Yeah, fantastic. I think the common issues that we share, you laid them out very well. So you were talking about you wanted to step out and see whether MSD skills are generable, whether the language applies to different markets. So when we say that, actually, I've also been working lately for last at least 8-9 years in some of the works. Bill also was a colleague on extreme poverty, nutrition, malaria elimination in Nigeria. So in all of these sectors, as we try to apply market systems development, we increasingly heard about hybrid approaches. People are talking about we need a hybrid approach. The typical market systems then does not work. But I've been a bit reserved. I have some kind of a reservation on hybrid approach. I would say I feel like it's systems change and the markets define what systems change would look like. So for me, there's no hybrid approach. So can you help me unpack this issue of hybrid approach?
Okay, hybrid approach. It's not the first time I guess that's been put to me in a variety of ways. Hybrid approach or M4P light. Could we just have M4P light? Where does M4P or MSD, whatever, where does that apply, and where do we do something different? And And I think there's a number of things there. I think at a slightly more superficial level, it probably reflects a lack of understanding about what MSD is and what it can offer us as development professionals, I suppose. Um, uh, and that's the starting point there. So I guess, and in fact, fairly recently, I don't know if Marshall's with us on this call. Is Marshall here, Rubaiyath? I can't see the list of people, but if he is, I was rereading fairly recently an article that he, Alan, and Rob wrote for the Small Enterprise Development Journal some years ago on BDS market development, so quite a few years ago. And it was saying, what do we need to do to move this forward? And there was two things, well, the precursor to it was probably stop calling it BDS, and it's all about market development applied to a range of development challenges. And so what really is market development then? But what is this M4P stuff, and what value does it add if it's going to go into a whole range of sectors and a whole range of challenges? What really is it? And so they had three things really. One is continue to reinforce the core logic about what it is. That's the number one thing we ought to be doing. Number two is to continue to reflect and innovate our understanding of the sort of frameworks and tools that we have at our disposal that can help us make sense of the dynamic world and challenges that we live in. And three, trying to ensure we build the right skills and attract the right people and the right kind of funders as well, the right environment for us to be able to tackle these problems legitimately, coherently. And I don't think that agenda has really changed in terms of what it is. When people use it, if it's not around a kind of misunderstanding, what does it tend to be? For me, at least, we do MSD when it's in these environments, and we do something else somewhere else. So I guess it comes down to two things for me. Others might have other views, of course, but there's two things really. One is it's seen still very much as a private sector development approach. So when people say I need to work with government, that must be different. So I work with you on the private sector with an MSD approach, and I work with government doing what? A government approach? I don't know what that means. I don't know what their principles of development practice are when they say that. I don't know how they distinguish what they mean by working with government in terms of principles, frameworks, tools, and practices. That's distinct and different from what they would do in terms of working with the private sector. They never really seem to explain that to me. Or it refers to working at the other end for rather working with, but working for. So MSD is only relevant for somebody that's already an active participant in the market commercially. And so for those that are for various reasons, whether that's social mobility reasons or whether that's economic reasons or whether it's reasons of disability or literacy or ethnicity or whatever else it might be, those that need a kind of a push to be able to enter the labor market or enter some economic activity, if there's some kind of barriers that's stopping it, that's stopping their participation, at least at a basic level, in something productive. What do we do then? We need a different approach then. And for me, it's these are both legitimate questions. Working with the private sector might look and feel very different to working with government. So we have to apply our thinking in a different way. Similarly, working with economic actors in a market system to continue to grow and evolve from where they are versus the kind of interventions we might do to get people to a position where they can participate more might require a separate set of tools and tactics to do that. But I don't see that fundamentally the thinking, the development thinking, is or should be particularly different to that. And so I don't see that it's a hybrid approach strategically, but it definitely might be a hybrid approach tactically. And that often brings us back to, so for example, I was reading something that MasterCard Foundation did recently with one of the FSD trusts, where they were doing surveys of small entrepreneurs. And we all know that intuitively, those of us who used to work in small enterprise development, that small enterprises are concerned with two things. One is mitigating risk because of the nature of the business and the environment they work in. And one is, if you like, maximizing returns to labor or profit. And they have to always manage to mitigate these things. We also know from Andrew Dorwood's work, this idea of hanging in and stepping up and stepping out, this kind of precarious nature of poverty transition, from hanging in to stepping up, from being out the market stroke in some way. And the latest research, I was reading something recently from McKinsey, introducing this idea of it wasn't the term they used, but a term that many of us might be familiar with, the kind of living wage, this idea of a poverty line isn't sufficient. We need to be considering a kind of, from a dignity and welfare point of view, a higher line of some kind of living wage. And the gap between the two roughly was something like $2.15 for the absolute poverty line to something like $12 for the living wage line. Well, that's quite a big gap. And if you recognize that the, if you like, floating up and down, managing risks and returns, is going to put people not in a linear pathway, but in a pathway with many different risks and pitfalls, a bit like snakes and ladders, moving forward, dropping back, as any entrepreneur knows, this happens quite a lot, within quite a breadth. And so if that's the kind of reality, that people don't just move linearly from one step to another and never drop backwards, then if it was like that, I guess you could say we have one approach that gets us from A to B and a separate approach that gets us from B to Z. But I don't think the real world is like that. And therefore, I don't think it's helpful disjointing development thinking and a set of principles here and a completely different set of principles there. Practices, yes, quite possibly. Principles, no. And so I think how do we tackle the hybrid? How do we overcome people's thinking in that? I guess it's going back to what Marshall and Alan and Rob said at the beginning. Let's reinforce the core logic. What is MSD at its heart? Principles, frameworks, tools, and practices. What is its value? Well, we can discuss that maybe, I don't want to keep talking, but discuss that in this context here. What does it help us do? And how is that valuable to people working in areas that are not so invested in a history of the applications to date?
Super. Quite some wise reflections. I think clearly what you laid out is that tactically there can be a hybrid approach because the engagement strategy with the government might differ with the engagement strategy for a private sector or a community organization or an NGO. So tactically, there might be some hybrid requirements, but fundamentals, you're asking us to go back to the core principles of MSD, and I believe we all share the value that it offered, is to understand from the whole system's point of view, what exactly are the barriers to sustainability and scalability. And that often requires a multi-stakeholder approach, I believe, in partnerships. It's not just a linear approach, as you also said. And both enterprise and households, we have often seen, do not take a linear model for growth. We have done some excellent work in Innovision trying to map out a very extreme poor households graduation pathway when they become enterprise. And we have seen how the starting point also have an impact on how the households invest, reinvest, expands, diversifies, and eventually becomes a enterprising household. So it all varies on the baseline and therefore requires a very different approach depending on what kind of household we're talking. But also the sectors are of importance. It's just not only about the stakeholders, but we start with the sectors, right? So health, education, skills, these all have very different dynamics. Some have very strong public sector engagement. Some have the connotation that this is a public good, not a private good. So if you are intervening in such a sector, then it's inevitable that we would be engaging with NGOs, we would be engaging with the government, but the principles still remain the same, that we want it to be systemic, we want it to scale and sustain. And actually, I'm doing an exciting work right now for Save the Children here in Bangladesh. So they were implementing this FCDO project on nutrition, and they had a lot of different components. But they also had a replication project designed from the very onset. And what they're doing now is they picked up some of the interventions and are working closely with the government agencies so that they scale the interventions regionally. And very interestingly, we were in another assignment for the same client. We were doing an AER, Adopt, Explain, Respond framework analysis. And excitingly, what we saw is that the government was doing much more on expanding and adapting the interventions than the private sector. So it was very interesting for me. And what I felt like is because it was fitting into the government's agenda much more than the private sector's agenda of growth. So I think the context is important for us to understand. And on that note, talking about context, as you can increasingly see that there has been shift to work on the issues of climate change, gender, youth, skills. So the donors are increasingly pushing us to work on this inclusion agenda and on these emerging risks and crises in the world. So how do you see the relevance and evolution of MSD in this context, David?
Yeah, I'll answer that. I'm going to, before I do that, I'm just going to, I've just seen Bill's comment. And so I just want to just acknowledge that firstly. And just, I guess, and when we get into sort of discussion, and maybe Bill can add something more here, but the point that he's making is from weak to stronger systems. At some point on that spectrum, we're starting and we're trying to move in that direction. And as Bill said, we have to set legitimate visions about what change can look like over what period of time we're involved with. And one of the things I worked on with Bill in that MADE review I referred to earlier in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, we tried to pictorially represent what the system looked like at different points in the program's trajectory over time. And how it started with sort of quite disjointed, limited sort of institutional arrangements, quite disjointed, a very, very slightly bleak picture, if you like, of what a market system looked like, and how that evolved over time, and how it evolved consciously. This is the key point of it, consciously in the mind of the program team, or at least in the mind of senior members of the program team, about how this market system needs to evolve and develop. And we managed to map that kind of pictorially to look at the depth and complexity of the institutional arrangements that will define that market system over time. And we're also then using it to test things like resilience. So suddenly when COVID hits and social mobility declines rapidly, no one can move around, et cetera, as a result of going from where we were to where we are now, what did MADE and PIND in Nigeria, I guess there are many negatives to COVID, of course, a lockdown. There was some ability to reflect and look at now this market says new set of arrangements, new institutional depth. Does it allow farmers and market participants to react and respond to shocks and stresses like COVID, as extreme as that was, in a way that would have been better than before? And I'll just say, yes, it did. And if people are interested in discussing that further, Bill can tell you how it did a bit later on. Going back to your point on climate and water and others, and your point on government to save the children. So I guess I use two examples rather than sort of thinking a bit more cerebrally about this. So I'm working in Indonesia for the last year, 18 months, something like that, with the World Bank and the Global Financing Fund on approaches to tackling anemia in pregnant women and stunting in children under 5. And we've looked at a range of sort of intervention responses that can seek to improve those worsening incidents and effects of those conditions on women and pregnant women and children. One area that we've focused in on is fortified rice. So fortifying rice with whatever micronutrients are relevant. And the government's done some pilots over recent years in that area. But they came to a realization that we've done pilots, but they were never really designed as to really learn and inform against any kind of vision for scale. Going back to Bill's point here, what's our vision for how we want the system to work in future? So from an AAR perspective, they didn't consider that at all, really. It was just fortified rice could be a good intervention. Let's get some fortified rice done. Let's get it out through social safety net programs. And let's see whether or not we can give people nutritious food that could stop them starving and dying. And it was one of a series of foodstuffs that were given to targeted households and families. And there's a lot of things you could learn from that, but it was never seeking to inform what a legitimate vision of scale and change might look like. And so there wasn't a natural kind of transition from pilot to scale, because the pilot never investigated scale barriers or scale visions or anything like that. So we've had to sort of go back in and say, right, well, what might scale look like here? What's the respective roles of public and private sectors and consumers, for that matter, in that picture? And government, as you say, Rubaiyath, our first starting point was going back and saying, well, what are the health problems specifically that you want fortified rice to respond to? What specifically are they? And they hadn't really considered that before. It was just the WHO is saying this is a good blend that cures many ills, so we've gone with that. It's like, no, but each one of those blends has a cost, and it has a technical challenge for fortifying the rice with it. So what exactly is the health problem and priority in Indonesia that you want fortified rice to respond to? So this sort of setting objectives. Number one, in the MSD, what is MSD approach? Focus on objectives. What are they? And put them forward at the heart of that consideration. So they've decided it's anemia in pregnant women and it's stunting in children under 5. Okay, good. So how many people are we talking about here? Who, how many, and where are they? Is the next question. Well, who exactly, and who are we intending to reach here? And that's taken us quite a while as well to look at the data and understanding and say, well, how many are we talking about here? And what it has meant is that the scale of the problem far outstrips the financial and ability of government to do it all themselves through targeted social safety net programs. The scale challenge, the number of people that need fortified rice or could usefully benefit from it, far outstrips by multiples the amount of people government could legitimately meet through direct intervention. So part of our process in applying MSD was saying, well, okay, so there's a use-need gap there that's quite significant that you can't overcome. What do we do about it? And at that point, it was then opening the ideas to expand the discussion from policymakers and government that are focused on health problems and populations suffering from those into a recognition that we can't do it all ourselves, but we still have the ambition to meet it. So, well, what do we need to do? And well, you need to work in partnership with others, clearly, and really look at what your role is to leverage if you like, a whole system approach to meeting that public priority challenge. And so the conversation is opening up now with the private sector, who are already doing some degrees of fortified rice, but targeting high-income consumers. And it's opening up a whole range of debates and investigations into demand not being one thing, income levels not being one thing, individuals' aspirations not being one thing, social safety net distribution not being one retail channel through which people access food, et cetera, et cetera. So now we're starting to piece together this, what does the system look like, and how would it need to be developed to be responsive to these public health priorities that the government's now set? And within that, what is the role of government? What is the role of the private sector to bring this along? The reason why I've elaborated a bit of that is one of the interests that I've had. I mentioned 3 things. I only told you 2. I said about the health and the climate change. The third area is more of a specialization, I guess, on collective impact, multi-stakeholder partnership approaches, technically. So I saw a Beam blog by Julian Peach recently, where he was extolling the virtues of partnership broking and calling everyone MSD to get their staff trained in it. I did my level 1 partnership broking course about 3 years ago, around the same time that Julian did, to try and really deepen some of my technical understanding of this. And beyond that, from just getting partnership broking, get up and running, but how do you manage partnerships through conflict arbitration, mediation, these sorts of skills and services and so on. I, of course, am no good at that because I'm far too opinionated to ever be considered neutral and as a good conflict arbitrator. So that's clearly something which I learned about myself, that I'm never going to be very good at that. But I do recognize it's very important to have as part of your team. If you're going to get into partnerships in the first place, you need to be able to manage them effectively. And so some of these things that we're actually very good at doing in MSD, even if we don't necessarily professionalize it and extol it and codify it, these are the sort of things that apply to the climate, gender, and youth challenges and urbanization challenges that you talk about. Why? Firstly, they're complex. So we have to have ways of demystifying complexity. Secondly, the nature of the problems are not technical in nature, they're adaptive in nature. And if they're adaptive in nature, that means definitionally that they're beyond the capability of any singular organization to fix them. And so if you want these things challenged, you have to work in a collective impact multi-stakeholder modality. And to do that means, as Bill refers to in his message, and I've just tried to refer, firstly, getting us focused on what the right objectives are. Talking about youth, that doesn't mean anything. Climate doesn't mean, well, it means everything and nothing. Climate is everything. What specifically do you mean? And what specifically are the objectives that we want to tackle here? And against those objectives, how specifically is the current system underperforming in respect of how we would like it to be performing, what better looks like? And until we get those, and what MSD can do is to help bring the tools and skills and experiences to help walk through, if you like, dealing with complexity, defining what the nature of the problem is, assessing the performance of the current system in respect of those kind of objectives that we set ourselves. And then when we start thinking about a call to arms and actions and interventions, thinking about how do we, in light of that uniting vision, how do we then work in more of a partnership approach with multiple stakeholders in a way that helps move forward towards better, however that's defined. So when we break it down in those areas about what MSD is and what value it can add, I think it can add a massive amount of clarity and transparency and rigor and energy to many of these processes and challenges that people are clearly struggling to work with.
So
because they're big challenges.
Yeah, and a few things that I was picking up as you spoke. I'll come to the issue of the scale, but when we are talking about demystifying complexity, I often also wonder whether when we say the systems are complex, therefore we need to be adaptive, and therefore we cannot show results. Is it all, at times I feel like we're using it as a scapegoat to saying that we can't do this because it's too complex. But also as a systems change facilitator, I must say that I've seen the value in, at times, just looking at the core of what value we are offering through intervention, just the core of the pain points. What pains are we solving for the beneficiaries, and how this intervention or the innovation that we're trying to promote is going to address that. And just looking at that situation and then design intervention around it, and not necessarily making things so complex and abstract that no one can flourish within it. Do you see the same issue? Like, I mean, we need to create a ground for people and the system to flourish. And I think if we say that, always try to say that systems is too complex, then maybe we make it also difficult for the multi-stakeholders, as you speak, to respond to.
Yeah, I think there's two things that there's probably several things. There's two things that kind of if I can invoke my former colleague Mr. Gibson, there's two things that would make me stick my neck out and see all the veins in my neck starting bubbling, which is what Alan used to do when he used to get very frustrated with things, and he couldn't hide it, of course, from his face. There's two things that if I was sort of invoking Alan, frustrate me. But one is this whole move away from the whole interest in systems is was initially in response to limitations of direct delivery approaches. So we're interested in systems change. Why? Because we want meaningful impact at scale that's sustainable, and that's what we want. Systems change is a means to that end of sustainable impact at scale. And a lot of the talk about systems itself, whilst there's a lot of interesting perspectives on that, and bringing in ideas from other disciplines, other sciences is in principle great. I fear that it starts to put systems change as an end, not a means, and that concerns me. And we get endless sort of, let's define what a system means and let's try and measure it in different ways. No, it's a means to an end. The end is meaningful impact at scale for those whose lives and livelihoods we're there to try and see improved in some way. So we get far too caught up on that, and even the shift from M4P, the P bit matters to me, and I'm sure it matters to all of us on this call. The shift from that to MSD, I think, is part of that that shift away from why are we doing what we're doing, making markets work for the poor, as opposed to market systems development for the sake of developing market systems.
Mhm.
That worries me. The second thing that worries me
Sorry, David, are
is,
you
and I,
suggesting
yeah,
that
sorry.
we should move back to MFOP?
No, I think I'm not actually. No, I'm not. But I'm suggesting we move back and don't lose sight of why we're doing all of this,
Right.
what development actually means, um, and having poor in there somewhere, in some way. Is a good thing. You know, it's not systems change for the sake of system change for me. Um, so I think that point's made. The second point, though, and I want to reflect on someone that helped me set up the Gallus Edge, Daniel Ticehurst. Daniel wrote a blog, I think, again for Beam fairly recently, where he's sort of expressing his concerns about the way that monitoring. So my first point was really on strategy. You know, why are we doing this? This systems change for something. That's a strategic issue. I want to jump right to the other end of it and look at monitoring. And the point Daniel was making is I think we've lost our way in monitoring as well, which is we're so fixated on yields and farmer incomes and higher level poverty indicators that are very, very difficult to measure robustly and credibly in the timeframes of typical programs we're working on. I'm not saying we don't try and look at them, but we've done that almost at the expense of looking at some of the what MSD would say is look at the point of the intervention, the market systems change, measure that rigorously. That's what we're trying to change. Who are we working with? Is the partnership taking hold? Are we seeing signs of sustainability? Are we seeing signs of impact? Are the incentives aligned? Is this something which we think we have a platform that we can build on? If we can, how is that vision going to be realized and how are we going to crowd others into that marketplace? And we've lost our way a bit because, of course, the accountability relationship with funders, who are understandably, again, I'm not criticizing them necessarily, but there has to be a balance. And of course, the way in which programs are being reviewed was all about high level indicators. So all of the monitoring effort focused on high level indicators. And we have nice little case studies underpinning them, yes, but I'm not sure that we've necessarily thought, I think we've lost our way in terms of why are we monitoring, what are we monitoring, how are we monitoring, and who are we monitoring with and for. And I do feel a little bit, and I guess I'm reflecting a bit, sympathizing with Daniel here, that we talk, it goes back to Rondinelli's work in the 80s around adaptive monitoring and why we do it, about democratizing, if you like, development processes with those actors and beneficiaries that we would like to see involved and benefiting from our programs. And I think we've moved completely away from that, largely in the MSD field, partly because of what funders were asking us to do. We didn't push back sufficiently, and partly, and I'm going to again be probably criticized for this, but it wouldn't be the first time. I don't think the DCD standard. I think that's part of the problem, actually, in this particular respect, because I wonder whether it's become so dogmatic now, and so kind of closed loop that I think we've probably lost our way in terms of what's the purpose of monitoring and who's it for, who's it with, who benefits from this. And I say that in comparison with some of the things I'm seeing around impact management and ESG financing and so the work of 60 decibels and Tom Adams and so on, that's genuinely trying to look at what does impact actually mean? how do people that are being impacted, how would they measure this? How would they consider this? What were the indicators they might use? How would they determine when they feel impacted or not, rather than us? And so I'd like a bit more of a balance. I'm not saying get rid of the DCD standard, anything like that. It has a value to it, certainly. But I'm saying it's not everything and only this. There has to be a way of reimagining why we do monitoring, how we do it, who we do it with, and who we do it for, that goes beyond that. That I'm seeing emerging quite strongly in other fields, and I don't think we in MSD are sufficiently keeping up for this, because I think all trains lead to the DCD standard, and I don't think they should. There we go. I probably offended a few people there, but it's been said now. There we go.
I think we will have a lot of discussion that can itself be a fireside chat. So, but there are some interesting reflections coming on the chat room. So one, Ifat sent it directly to me, but she was asking to demystify the beneficiaries because she often finds it difficult. As we speak about results monitoring and so on and so forth, I think it's also important because at the end of the day, we're talking about inclusion. We're talking about the system working for people who are excluded. So how do we define these beneficiaries and immerse ourselves? So that's the question. And also Jennifer is asking whether it's too much of a calling when in one project where the donors are asking for women empowerment, climate change, adaptation, and everything together. So we're already struggling to deliver scale and sustainability as you speak, because we have seen more often than not that it doesn't happen in a year or 2 years. It often takes time. And also in that time space, the markets evolve so much that the whole point of adaptation comes in within the intervention as we are facilitating. We need to adapt as we are implementing as well. So, and put on that all this increasing pressure of equality, women empowerment, climate change, everything put together, whether that's too much of a calling, whether we need to pull back our reins.
Yeah, just as I said, it was Friday afternoon, Rubaiyath, and you're supposed to be going easy on me and asking me some nice simple questions, so I can pretend to everyone on the chat that I'm incredibly insightful and thoughtful and erudite. Then you go and ask me things like that. Let me reflect. Firstly, on the self-selection bit, my response to that is, if we are genuinely working with a localization agenda in multi-stakeholder collective impact approaches, we don't define who the beneficiaries are. Those that we're working with and through define who those beneficiaries are. So, for example, as I said, in Indonesia, the governments, we've been helping the government to understand who it is seeking to impact and how we would measure that. So, women with anemia, pregnant women with anemia between these ages that's particularly affected, and working with the government's health information service to be able to track the incidence of anemia in women and overlay that with areas of geographic areas where fortified rice is going to be, if not made available, either through commercial channels or through social mechanisms. So they will be understanding who's making these decisions, who they're trying to target, whether it's private companies that decide who their clientele are and who they want to market and promote products to. So if we're working genuinely in that multi-stakeholder partnership approach, we don't have to self-select anybody. Particularly, we have to have a clear view about how we're structuring, shaping intervention that's responsive to, and we hope connecting of, the kind of target group we're interested in. But beyond that level, I guess it's up to those that we're working with that define it more granularly than that. And in some sectors, that's easier. You know, in some sectors like financial services or telecommunications or health services even, it's incumbent when you're trying to sell a service. The market research that they do is far higher than we would do necessarily in agriculture or enterprise development or something, because they're trying to market a service to those individuals. They better damn well understand who they're trying to sell it to. And so one of the things I've done in health is to really get excited by the, if you like, really high quality market research work that they're doing that we used to do a little bit back in BDS days. We haven't done so much since we moved to sort of value chains necessarily. But self-selection should be done by the partners we're working with is my broad point, I think. The bit on mixed and multiple objectives, it does worry me, as you say, because these are not trivial things. You know, could we just have lots of jobs, please, for lots of young unemployed people, particularly men, but we don't want to lose sight of the gender ambitions of this either. And could you please ensure that if young men get jobs, they're less sort of run the risk of being militantized or whatever. Oh, by the way, could you turn back the tides of the Sahara and push it north and turn it all green, please, in just 5 years? It takes me back a little bit to before I got involved in development, I guess, and integrated rural development work, which had mixed multiple objectives and very complex integrated rural development programming, all of which largely failed. Precisely because these were complex, difficult objectives in and of their own right. and by shoving them all in together and simply confused the whole picture even further. And so I understand why donors are sort of doing some of this. I guess we as a field need to push back a little bit on that. I guess also we at program level need to be honest about where we think the dividends can be from our analytical work that we have and frame those objectives transparently. Here's what we think we can contribute to under the green growth heading. Here's what we think we can contribute towards gender empowerment. Here's what we think we can legitimately do that. And use the power of MSD around focusing on objectives underpinned by clear analytical work with clear partners who are motivated, engaged, incentivized to want to go after these targets and monitor and measure rigorously in respect of that. We say we're professionals, let's be professional. Let's be rigorous, let's be transparent, and let's do our jobs well.
David, I have a question here, which might complement what you're discussing. A challenge that we face often is that in the design document of the donors, so they have the mandates like we want you to achieve all this inclusion agenda, but then they also often define these sectors. The challenge here is that if you have all of it defined, I want to intervene in the sector, I also want this, impacts. The challenge is we often struggle because we don't have any room. So either give us the impacts and then let us define where can we invest to have those impacts, or give us the sectors and then ask us where can we have the impacts. So, but when the donors are asking to do both at the same time, I feel constricted. I feel like my rooms for growth and strategy formulation is very constricted and narrowed.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things as I said, I've stepped out a little bit when I left Spring Core MSD kind of echo chamber debates, deliberately so. And so I wouldn't say that there's other people on this call far better placed than I am right now to talk about the extent to which we as a community of practice are engaging in this kind of debate, policy level debate, which is really what you're talking about here, policy level debate with key funders that have an interest in MSD work. How are we organizing ourselves? What kind of discussions are we trying to have with those funders? And how are we trying to ensure that these concerns we see at operational level on the ground are reflected and tackled at headquarter level through policy guidelines that the funders are putting out? And I certainly was concerned that we weren't doing that very effectively a few years ago. I felt we were, as I say, this echo chamber idea that we're all kind of, here's the approach, and we're all self-congratulatory. And yes, many of the presentations and cases were relevant and interesting to a certain level. But in the context of global climate transition and all of the politics and energy and emotion and opportunity around that area, or whether it's around international migration or displaced peoples or refugee communities, a whole similar things here, the complexities around that, the areas around it. How do we break these things down in those debates and those communities and demonstrate the value and worth of MSD thinking to the kind of complexity, challenges that each of those areas of interest have in urbanization, youth employment, all of these areas? I'm not sure that strategically we as a field have necessarily been as organized as we might be in getting our act together and advocating, representing how we think we can help navigate some of those challenges back towards policymakers. Maybe there's more we can do on this. And maybe it also takes us back to a point I made earlier about the paper that Marsh and Anna wrote, which is the last thing we want probably is an MSD branded program in climate change. We want MSD principles informing and influencing the way we approach climate change programming. And we want the same thing for refugees and migration. We want the same thing for human trafficking, etc. But do we want them called an MSD approach to this, an MSD approach to that, rather than green growth informed by MSD principles and practices? Because my fear is if we have an MSD program, we're back to the hybrid point. Well, we have an MSD program tackling parts of climate, and we have a completely different program doing other things as well. These two things never speak and are completely incoherent with each other. And I think the value of MSD goes beyond that. Is effectively effectively, it's 20 odd years now of hard-earned experience about what development effectiveness, how to improve development effectiveness more generally across a range of topics and areas. And if we just narrow it down to branded MSD programs in a narrow space, I don't think we'll ever fulfill the full ambition and relevance of all the work and skills and knowledge that we have. We'll just be partitioned on the sideline of big debates going forward. That's my fear. I think we're better than that. We've got more to offer than that. I'm not quite sure exactly how we do it, but I think we probably ought to be thinking more about that. I'm guessing Lucio has, I know his previous role would have probably a lot of ideas about that, and be far more informed than I am about the kind of debates and discussions that are ongoing at certain higher level areas and so on. But I certainly didn't see much of it in an organized way before. I haven't seen it since, but I think it's needed.
Fantastic. Bill is suggesting whether we call an MSD program or we apply MSD approach to resolving the problem. I don't know about you, but I have kind of internalized that approach. So it's the approach that I try to use to define the problem and the solution. So
yeah, it's got to be an approach, Bill, for me. It can't just be an MSD program, because that'll be a program alongside other programs that are probably working against it, as we've seen. We'll have a livelihoods program next to an MSD program, trying to give free goods to communities that we're also trying to empower them and engage in market responses. I think it has to be an MSD approach, but equally the challenge I think for me is we can call it that, but how do we maintain the integrity of the approach? How do we make sure that the principles of it are transparent and visible, and we continue to invest in that learning and knowledge management going forward? It doesn't just become so well mainstreamed you'd never know it was there in the first place.
So that leads me to my probably final question to you, is that there are two sides of it. One is us, the practitioners, how we take the approach, how we define it, how we internalize it. We also direct the interventions and the ways it's applied worldwide. So our understanding. So then I'm talking about people here, us, we the people, how we are understanding the approach and how we're applying it. But then also, when we are implementing the interventions for last 2 decades around the world, I've seen that when we have champions from the private sector, the government, we are able to deliver the systemic change that we're expecting. But often the process that we're trying to build is working because there are a few people who believe in it and who are interested to drive it. And when we're struggling to get these people, we also struggle to deliver systems change. So my question is, to what degree you see MSD is people-driven as opposed to process-driven?
At the very beginning of this, I said I used to do lots of modeling and things and observe the world, and I was very pleased with these wonderful reports I used to produce. All the answers are in here. If only the bloody minister would read them and act on them. It's incredible work. And of course, you go back a year's time, and it's you see a report, but it's used as a doorstop to keep his door open or something, And as at that point, I was sort of thinking, okay, so let's actually get involved in the messiness of development as a process, rather than a set of model scenarios and so on in an economist report. And that took me into moving from sort of process, I guess, into process first and giving it to people, as opposed to working with people through some kind of guided process and principles around that. So it's all about people for me. The reason why we're in development is because of people whose lives we would like to see improved in some way, and would like to see if we can bring in and utilize resources to help achieve that. And constantly asking ourselves, do we have skills and expertise and ability to actually do that in practice? And if we don't, what the hell are we doing? Go do something else. And so constantly using that focus on people to check and challenge ourselves about, are we doing the best that we can do, and do we still have a role in development? And if we don't, get out and do something else. The people we work with, you never see a good project that's staffed by people who aren't very good, do you? You can have all the wonderful processes in the world, so you can get your gold standard of the DCD stuff and deliver a bad project. Go figure. Wonderful system, wonderful process, but never actually applied to anything of any meaningful value or use. And it's the same thing with our partnerships. those that we want to work with and through. We know a partner that's performing well, and we'll see that in our metrics. We'll see that in the way in which the process is managed. We'll see that in the way that inspires and invokes others to want to crowd in and compete and collaborate in different ways. And we see those that simply want to capture our resources and use it for their own glorification and their own ends. That might achieve some degree of box ticking for us, but doesn't really get us to where we need to be. So process can be a useful guide and help. The reality of multi-stakeholder partnerships, the genuinely change-driven, don't really follow a process that we could predefine. But at different points in activity, we can identify where they are and help them move forward. It's all about people for me, Rubaiyath. It's all about people. Talking of which, we've got lots of people on this call that have listened dutifully to you and me talking for a long time.
The people make the collective.
Yeah, exactly. Are we going to be asking other people to say anything, or are we going to
be? We move on to that. This is the final phase then. So thank you all for listening to the very deep discussion. So I'm opening the floor for next 5 minutes as we wrap up. So yes, have your say.
There's lots of people on there. I know we're not very shy.
Hey guys.
There we go.
So good to hear you and see you guys.
Yes.
So very important conversations now. I just wanted to talk about one last point about this idea that we should use the term, we should say that a program is using the MSD approach, right? Rather than saying this is an MSD program. I think I agree with you, David, and I think in Mercy Corps, where I work now, we're having precisely this discussion. I mean, some people are asking, what is an MSD? What is an MSD program? And we're trying to sort of define what that is and come up with a sort of standard of what an MSD program is. And I think your thoughts are making me reflect that we might end up going down a route that might be counterproductive, precisely because of what you said. So I was thinking, okay, so if we say that a program uses an MSD approach, that's the best way of describing a program, then what are the other approaches that we have available? And I was trying to think, okay, so maybe the humanitarian aid is another approach, maybe sort of advocacy and social movements is another approach. And then what else do we have? We end up with, markets. So we have markets, social movements, and, advocacy, and then humanitarian aid. Are those the three only approaches in development that we have available in our arsenal, let's say? What are your thoughts and people's thoughts here in the group?
Let me just add on to that. There are other approaches like direct delivery approach. And I think that these are ways of thinking about it. A market systems approach is really one that's about facilitation and adaptation. And unfortunately, as David was raising the point earlier about the rice, fortified rice in Indonesia, that was more of a direct delivery approach. And so, we had this dilemma, in 2012, 2013, DFID had huge numbers of M4P projects. And then all of a sudden, the M4P projects started disappearing as M4P projects. But it became, actually, it's the approach that you use in solving all the problems, all the projects. And so, I don't want to call it the humanitarian approach. The humanitarian approach resolves a specific set of problems at a specific point in time. But that, to me, fits within a market systems approach, where you're trying to understand what do those people want to have at the end. You want to move on the relief to development continuum, and how do we apply that thinking as early as possible into it? So for me, I guess the two approaches are kind of a market systems facilitative approach, which can include some direct delivery, depending on the situation of the market, but always with that optic of how you're going to change for the future. And I'll shut up there. Thanks. But good question.
Thank you, Bill. I just wanted to pick up on that because I do the same. As for me, whatever the context is, if we are to deliver a systems change in that context, like you spoke about in humanitarian approach, there can also be a systemic approach there. So when we are to design sustainable, scalable interventions, I couldn't apply anything else. The MSD or a systemic approach is a way of designing that system solution. David, your reflection on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what are we learning in the world now, that there's rarely a singular, particularly with, I guess coming on, the kind of context to which humanitarian response is emerging into are not singular or one-off. You know, these are protracted. They happen with increasing regularity. And so if they were singular or one-off, we can go in there and fix them for a short period of time and then get out and it would be fine. Isn't really the case anymore. That these are regular repeat events. They might sort of change in severity or timing, but they're increasingly more regularized, increasingly more they don't just disappear. They're not once every 50 years. You know, they're once every 5 years, once every 3 years. They're much more shorter term, more protracted. I say different severity, different types, but nonetheless. And given that, I don't see how you can approach them in that singular one-off direct delivery way. I think you have to be thinking a little bit about what kind of market system capabilities do we need to build to be responsive to the kinds of shocks and stresses which are increasingly and regularly affecting people, albeit in different ways, slightly, because they're not always the same crisis at the same time that manifests exactly the same way and affects exactly the same people. But there's a pattern emerging here that we need to. So we need to think sustainability. We need to think about multi-stakeholder partnerships. We need to think about leverage and local action. And it seems to me, and again, I could be too short-sighted and ignorant here, but much of the work I've seen in the resilience and humanitarian responses are almost building the kind of capabilities for as long as they last, so that when we come back in to respond again, have some people to go and call up and have some people who we trained in the past that we can go and find again to come and do something. We're not thinking of it at all in a local system perspective. People working locally that continue to do it with each other for the right reasons. We're setting up infrastructure that allows us to go and re-engage when next we're called in on our white charging horses to go and save the local people. And I don't think that's the right way of seeing it. I think that's misguided, personally. And so I could be wrong, and that could be completely unfair. But that's what I see a little bit. And I'd rather people were approaching it and saying, you know, from a more market systems perspective, you know, how do we build the right kind of capabilities, the right kind of multi-stakeholder partnerships for the right reasons that endure locally, which can, yes, connect with international responses and so on, yes, but not solely for that purpose, which often I say, or fear that they might be just doing it for their own reasons. Maybe that's wrong, but there's a thought there at least. I'm conscious someone else had their hand up.
Zakaria.
Zakaria.
Zakaria, please go ahead.
Have we lost him?
No, he's here. Okay.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Yes. Go ahead, please.
So I'm Zakaria. I work for MIDA as a market systems specialist. Thanks for sharing your perspectives with us. It's been great listening to all of you. I'm also just been reflecting on what we've been doing together in this field. And sometimes we hear in terms of honest criticism from other stakeholders about how the unintended consequences of market system development program that we run, particularly in the context of how market-based approaches are also leading to commoditization of agricultural products or produce, leading to food insecurity in local communities. So the question I've been asking is, are there opportunities that things can be done differently whilst enhancing efficiency, productivity? Are there approaches that we have used in different contexts. I mean, other colleagues have used in different contexts that ensure that, yes, at the end of the day, income levels are improved, but food security is not jeopardized in the local communities. Thank you.
I wonder, I'll jump in and maybe invite, I'll certainly Bill, you're involved in this, but I made, when we were presenting a Beam thing with Bill and others on the MAID program, I was trying to bring a debate together between resilience and market systems development. That was the kind of theme and trend. And I tried to make a proposition that is resilience actually concerned with the mitigation of loss, primarily. And market development, the maximization of returns to labor or capital, whatever else it might be. So market systems about getting more, and resilience about losing less, if you like. And yes, that's polarizing the views, but putting that as a proposition, polemically, to see whether or not that can get us thinking in a united way. And if that's true, thinking about it from the perspective of a small farmer. So, and Zach, going back to your point, Zach, that maybe if we encourage them to invest in taking advantage of moving from diversified crops to specialized crops and entering higher value markets and so on the basis of opportunity and potential return, is that actually at risk? Well, there's a possibility there, but there's also a possibility that if things go wrong, they're not sufficiently focused on mitigating potential risks as well. And if they don't equally focus on that, as you say, then if things go wrong, they could well end up in a worse place than they were before. And the starting stage is, of course, most farmers try to do both things. They try and mitigate risk and manage and maximize returns. They try and do both these things. We coming in as external programs can influence their valuation about which one they should invest relatively in. And if we encourage too much on the one side and not enough on the other, could that leave them worse off in the future? My point is that if we consider resilience and as in that way and market systems the other way, and have them combined as legitimate objectives in the same program, and we have results and reporting that doesn't just look at jobs created but jobs saved, doesn't just look at income earned but income not lost, etc., or assets built rather than assets saved, where often we don't get a chance to report on that in market systems programs. It's all about the upside, it's all about the uptick. If we were to think about it in that way and allow our programs, MSD programs, to not just conceive of it in that way, but also measure results of it in that way, might we be offering a better service? I'm thinking of farmers here, given your question, Zach. I'm thinking of farmers here to help them make the right determination for them based on how they manage risk and how they make investments going forward. Just a thought. I don't know, Zachariah, if that responds to it. I don't know if others have other thoughts on responding to his question.
Yes, absolutely, and I like the angle of also enhancing resilience and not just focusing on getting more, and so I like that angle, and because it's been a legitimate concern in how some of our programs have enhanced more access in terms of income, people making more money, but overall in the community, access to food then becomes a bit challenging. So yes, it's very important. What we've been trying to do in MIDA is also to promote diversification to ensure that as part of the overall programming, people are not just tied up. We are not just promoting a single commodity, but looking at other local resilient food stuff that, for example, the farmers can promote alongside. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, that's great, thanks. As I said, I posited that view about resilience mitigating losses and MSD that, but at the time I had no one came back and there's no traction. So maybe I was just talking utter rubbish, but who knows? Who knows?
Okay, so thank you so much. So we'll be wrapping up. So we have touched base on a lot of topics and quite complex ones, but bridging it all together, what we are talking here is that in this increasing, let's say, complex world, in the world of crisis, the market systems can be applied as an approach to think of the sustainable, scalable solutions, the systemic solutions, and the call has been to go back to the basics, the fundamentals. The fundamentals remain the same, even though we are applying in different contexts, in different sectors, in different countries, but the fundamentals remain same. If we apply the same foundations, we are actually applying the market systems approach. So there can be hybrid approach tactically, but also later Bill has said that, let's say even within a humanitarian context, you have a system, and then you therefore have a systems intervention there, but also you start somewhere, there is a direct delivery, and that takes you to somewhere. And then from that point onwards, the market comes in. So we in practice, we call it push and pull approach. So, but Lucio was also asking like how to, I think Lucio's point was about using it program-wide, right, Lucio? So the solution we're talking about here is using market systems as an approach, adapting it, embracing it, and then it can be applied in different contexts and setting. So what we will do is we will part two. We need a part two of this session, David. That's the suggestion. So yes, inshallah, we will do that. But what we are going to do right now is we will synthesize the discussion that we had. I'm sure there was a lot of discussion, and there will be some merit in synthesizing it. So we'll be sharing with you the synthesis from this discussion. But also, as you said, Jennifer, we intend to come back to you again with some other topic. But do keep in touch and write back to us your queries, your questions, your reflections. David, over to you for closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks everybody for taking the time today. The idea is that this would be a start of a conversation. It's different to Beam. We don't want to align necessarily with that. We just want self-selection, people turning up that want to talk with other like-minded individuals, to explore areas of interest or concern, however sure you are about what you're saying or however unsure you are and want some validation of it. So we want to see this as a series of fireside chats going forward. So Jennifer, you can interview John Clifford and vice versa. Lucio, you can interview Bill, and Bill can interview Rubaiyath. And so we can start putting some of these connections together and start getting issues tabled that might be important to you, that we want to explore and extol and talk a little bit about, and in front of some of our peers in a safe kind of environment like this, and try and help us, I guess, move towards a number of things. One is helping each other to express ourselves and some of the articulate some of the concerns or experiences that we want to share but aren't quite sure how to do it. To invite some kind of response from others that can help us move forward in our own thinking. And ultimately, I think, Bill, I'm going back to something which you and I discussed some years ago about how can we then leverage some of the outputs of this towards some of these policy engagement with key funders, for example, or taking agenda towards maybe informing the likes of Beam or other platforms about here's the kind of group of issues that we think are emerging in these conversations, around which maybe you could seek to pool some resources and have some more structured, deeper forensic examination of these issues that can help us move forward. So I hope we can take this conversation forward in a variety of ways. I hope it'll be much less of me speaking next time and others coming in and talking about it. I'm certainly looking forward to that and to listening to the perspectives of everybody else. So thank you for making the time today. It's great to be back in the fold, as it were. Thank you, Rubaiyath. I'm definitely interviewing you next time, no doubt about that. And I wish you all a wonderful weekend. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bill, and everyone for joining.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.